Okay, so my name is Peter Holbrook. I am a social entrepreneur and I consider myself a social activist, but my mum still refers to me as a troublemaker and a very naughty boy. At Social Enterprise UK, we do all sorts of work, principally around market development. I'm very privileged to have built the world's largest network of social enterprises. And very soon we will be opening a subsidiary within the European Union to try and recover ourselves from the terrible effects of Brexit. So I will be seeing you again very soon. Now, Eleanor is a long friend of mine and an inspiration to me. And she said, Peter, we want to finish the day with something kind of upbeat and exciting. And she gave me this title, 10 Reasons to Remain Hopeful. Now, earlier today, we heard about the benefits of being an optimist. I think when I was 20 or 25, a long time ago, I would have considered myself an optimist. Today, I consider myself a realist, and I fully appreciate that the challenge of being hopeful and a realist in the current climate, particularly being British, is very, very difficult. I also acknowledge, really, the difficulty of being the last person on before your dinner. I know that you're beginning to think less about sustainability and more about food, particularly as the smells waft through the hall. Now, I've mentioned Brexit. I would just like to say again, as Victor said, that he and I are particularly pleased to be here over this particularly chaotic week in British politics. And actually, we are seeking refugee status. Has a home that they would like to offer us, or jobs. We would be delighted if we could stay here a little bit longer. Now, I only put this picture of our Prime Minister in my PowerPoint 2 days ago, and already it's out of date. Now, I would also just like to thank Cecilia and Alejandro for their amazing emceeing today. They've been absolutely amazing. And I would also just like to thank the interpreters who have been working so hard. I would like to... I feel like I need to thank the interpreters because I promised them I would go at a very sedate pace. But, knowing that dinner is ready, and I've only got 15 minutes to get through a half-an-hour session, I might be going at a pace that makes them feel slightly uncomfortable and makes them sweat. Apologies. Now, I am disappointed in the progress that we have made in the world over the last 30 years since I worked in social enterprise and social change. But as Martin Luther King said, we must accept infinite disappointment, but we must never lose infinite hope. Hope is what I cling to. And in this room today, and in the conversations I have back home, there are many, many reasons to be hopeful. So let's get through these 10 reasons very quickly, and then let's have a bite to eat and a drink. So first of all, the transition, ladies and gentlemen, is happening. It is beginning all over the world. We are beginning to see capital flow to renewables. We're beginning to see whole countries now achieve almost their entire domestic energy supply through renewable energy. Places like Bhutan are achieving this. We can do it together, and it will happen within our lifetimes. This is a reason to be positive. And it's not just the multinationals who are driving this transition. What I see are communities coming together, taking control of their own energy supplies. If we get the transition right, and I am hopeful that we can, we won't only transition to net zero, but we will also advance racial, indigenous, gender, and economic justice throughout the world. That is a possibility, and it's beginning to happen. My second idea or reason to be hopeful, is that we're no longer just talking about carbon capture. We are now talking about using carbon to actually create the products that we need to use in our daily life. We can now make vodka from carbon. We can drink and save the planet. But it's not just vodka. We're making diamonds from carbon. And just think about the impact of the diamond industry on the world. Actually, if we can sequester carbon from the atmosphere and put it into laboratory-made diamonds, we can still wear our bling and our jewelry, but not actually create the human misery and the environmental consequences that the diamond industry has traditionally created. And it's not just diamonds, it's perfume, and increasingly interestingly, it's construction. Concrete has a terrible impact on the planet. It creates huge, huge carbon. But actually, we're now developing the very, very materials that we need to build new housing, new homes, to deal with the homelessness crisis that's engulfed many parts of the developed world by capturing carbon and putting it into the very building materials we need to achieve the sorts of social justice that we all like to believe in. My third point, Generation Z. Many of you are Generation Z. Well, I am told that you are smart, capable, and more connected than ever before. And actually, this isn't just a transfer of responsibility from my generation onto the generation below. This is about actually seeing how capable and how innovative and how focused the new generations are on tackling the biggest challenges we face. Is anyone here going to admit to being a Generation Zer? Just Victor. You're definitely not a Generation Zer. Well, we look to you, sir. We look to you and everyone else of your generation to take social activism from the periphery to the mainstream. And it can happen. This guy here, for example, is a Dutch entrepreneur who started this business, Ocean Cleanup, when he was 16 years old. Today, he's 28, and over that period, he has been responsible for well over 100,000 kilograms of ocean plastic being repurposed into sunglasses, into all sorts of consumables where new raw plastics would have previously been used. Now, this isn't an easy path, as all entrepreneurs know, but it shows what can be done when lots and lots of people work together to solve some of the biggest challenges we face. My fourth reason to be hopeful is that rewilding is beginning to take place across the planet. We have seen, I think it was 2019, that in Ethiopia, 350 million trees were planted in just 12 hours. That's a phenomenal number. The ambition currently is to achieve over 1 trillion trees planted right across the world. And actually, we are becoming much more sophisticated, not only in the way that we plant trees, but also seagrass and other ways that we can sequester carbon back into our planetary systems. These are reasons to be cheerful. This would have been unimaginable only 10 years ago. Progress is slow. It brings me to my fifth point. Progress is slow, but it is persistent. This graph, ladies and gentlemen, shows the share of the world population living in absolute poverty. And I'm not suggesting that inequality is over, but we can see that absolute poverty is in decline. We have lifted millions and millions of people out of absolute poverty. And that has a huge impact on every single one of those lives. And let's not forget that. And it's not just the eradication of poverty. This might surprise you at a time when Europe is in war. Actually, what we can see is global deaths in conflicts over the last 700 years have been in pretty much consistent decline. And in fact, this decade, we see fewer deaths from conflict than we've seen certainly in the previous 100 years before. These are reasons to be hopeful. And of course, the rise of social enterprise. Tabita, which is led by a wonderful social entrepreneur, my good friend Kibret in Ethiopia, created the very first ambulance service in Ethiopia. The only model that would succeed within Ethiopia to provide that paramedic and ambulance response was actually through a social enterprise model. And Kibret, who runs Thibitha, is also the president of Social Enterprise Ethiopia, which we were privileged to help him establish. And you may be familiar with Patagonia. There was a lot of misinformation about what's happened to Patagonia in recent weeks. Patagonia, make no mistake, has not become a charity. Patagonia has become a social enterprise. He knew that being a B Corp was just not going to cut it. He had to transition the ownership model of his company to become a much more distributed model of ownership. And actually, we now see a £3.5 billion business using all of its profits to support the transition to a sustainable world. And Ecosia, is anyone using this search engine? Ecosia, Victor mentioned it earlier. If you're not using Ecosia, why aren't you using Ecosia? It's exactly the same as Google, but every time you use it, 100% of advertising revenue and profit goes to climate change causes. To date, Ecosia has planted 160 million trees right around the world. It's a phenomenal innovation that came from Germany. And actually, it continues to grow and grow and grow. And actually, it's beginning to scare the likes of Google just a little bit, which is no bad thing. And in Spain, we see things like Mondragon, the Mondragon Corporation, creating a whole new economic model for a whole region of Spain. These are reasons to be cheerful and hopeful. And of course, my favorite social enterprise in the world, which everyone forgets, is Sesame Street. Sesame Street did so much to bring education to black communities and to working class communities in the US. It would never have emerged unless it was driven by a purpose beyond profit. These models have gone from being rarities, oddities at the periphery of our economy. They're increasingly taking steps to becoming big mainstream players. There are reasons to be hopeful. Social enterprise, the role of social enterprise, you'll see Victor there in a slightly different suit. He makes the point that these are real businesses. These are not charities. These are real businesses, but they are doing things very differently. And in the UK, despite all the bad news you might see about our country, we have one of the most vibrant social enterprise communities in the world. 100,000 businesses and £60 billion of collective economic impact. The sixth reason to be hopeful, and I don't want to frighten anybody that might be using drones to eliminate larvae, but actually we are now developing the very first malaria vaccine. And I think we can take hope and inspiration from the speed at which the COVID vaccinations were developed. It was an unprecedented speed and pace, and it just goes to show you, when our minds are collectively focused on solving a problem, we can solve it. It's all about our collective motivation to tackle the problems that we face. And I do think that the COVID vaccinations show what can be achieved when the world focuses on a problem. And the internet. The internet, like everything else, has good and bad elements. But the internet, in many respects, has brought us together. The connectivity that it brings, the ability to share knowledge, the ability to collectively forge ourselves into campaign groups. Dictators and others have nowhere to hide. With that power of knowledge sharing, we can identify the root causes of the challenges we face as a global community, and using the power of the internet, we can address them much, much more quickly. It's another reason to be hopeful. And I think the worldwide embrace of anti-racism, we've heard how catalytic that was. George Floyd's death was a tragedy, and it deeply affected anybody that witnessed those terrible, terrible images. But I hope we recognize that good can come out of tragedy. And the worldwide embrace of anti-racism has taken a concept that people were frightened of right into the mainstream. My organization is a proudly anti-racist organization. I'm not sure we would have been able to say that 10, 15 years ago. I don't think we would have been able to say that legitimately. But an increasing number of people are understanding the drivers of prejudice and racism, and are proactively trying to dismantle the barriers to a fairer and more just and an anti-racist world. We can progress when we choose to. Number 9, localism versus globalism, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I've missed out nationalism, because nationalism from me gets a big thumbs down. And in my country and in Italy, there's too much nationalism. But what we are seeing though, are communities coming together and determining that they need to take more control. They need to come together, they need to create their own economies, and they need to drive sustainability, to bring back local jobs, high-quality jobs, generate their own energy, generate their own futures, and not be dependent on the global winds that blow around our nations and our world and can destabilize just about everything. So the power of taking control back into our communities must give us hope, because it doesn't just give empowerment to local communities. It also brings supply chains closer to home. It means that our communities and our economies are more resilient to the changes and the challenges that they face. And my last one, and then it's dinner, is you. You beautiful people. Well, some less beautiful than others, I'll admit, but on the whole, collectively, being in this community with you all is a great reason for hope. I would like to just remind you that forests are not single entities. They are a collective of millions and millions of biomes and organisms. Collectively, they can provide the solution that the world needs to our carbon challenges. And you are a forest of hope. You are the people, collectively, that can challenge the power systems, the concentrations of wealth, and reimagine what the world might look like. So, there's reasons to be hopeful. I do believe that love will win. And I would just like to say thank you so much for inviting me back here.